Even though it's been about 2 weeks since the US election in which Trump won a landslide victory, his name is still in the news headlines quite often, and it's likely that news outlets won't stop writing about Trump and his statements anytime soon. That's just the kind of person he is. But today I would like to discuss not Trump himself, but his perhaps most important campaign promise to end the war between Ukraine and Russia as soon as possible, and to finally bring the presidents of these countries to the negotiating table. Earlier, I have already released a video about Trump, where I briefly described how a peace treaty between these warring countries could turn out, but today I would like to dwell on this topic in more detail. In this video, I will tell you why a peace treaty between Russia and Ukraine may not turn out to be peace at all. Have a seat, it's time to talk. Back in 2022, there was an attempt at peace talks between the parties, but unfortunately it was not successful. Ukraine insisted that the Russian Federation return their territories, i.e. the Crimean Peninsula, as well as the occupied parts of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions, which Russia flatly refuses to do. In turn, the Kremlin asked Ukraine to recognize the new borders, in which the above-mentioned territories remain Russian, as well as the refusal to join NATO, in fact, the only guarantor of security for Ukraine. The full list of demands from the Russian side is on your screen. Of course, Kiev did not want to agree to such a terrible agreement for the country, given that Moscow, for its part, promised not to attack Ukraine. Except that it has promised this more than once. For example, on December 5, 1994, the Budapest Memorandum was signed, according to which Russia guaranteed Ukraine respect for its territorial integrity. Or on May 31, 1997, when both sides signed a treaty on friendship, cooperation and partnership between each other, which also included a clause recognizing the inviolability of the existing borders, but we all know very well how it ended. Obviously, the Kremlin is not going to just let the neighboring country go, since for the Russians, Ukraine serves as a buffer between their country and the West, and there are plenty of minerals in Ukraine itself, particularly near Crimea and in the Donbass. Plus, we should not forget that the Russians consider themselves the main heirs of Kievan Rus, whose capital, as you can already guess by the name, was located in the territories where the current capital of modern Ukraine is located. Putin is trying his best to maintain his influence in the neighboring country by creating an unstable situation there, thanks to which Ukraine has been unable to join Western institutions such as the EU and NATO for a long time. On November 21, 2013, former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych's decision to reject the agreement on rapprochement with the EU and reorient Ukraine towards rapprochement with Russia triggered a series of long and bloody street protests, better known as Euromaidan. Since the summer of 2013, the Russian authorities have been working on various plans of action to break away from Ukraine, but in the end they decided to seize the moment in February 2014. Why then? In February 2014, Yanukovych was deposed from the presidency and fled to Russia. This event contributed to the radicalization of sentiment both in Crimea and in the Russian leadership. Russia effectively used the Euromaidan as justification for the annexation of Crimea and the subsequent hybrid war against Ukraine in Donbass. Already in March of the same year, Russia seized the territory of the peninsula with minimal losses. Moreover, it managed to get away with weak sanctions that did not harm its economy much. After such a successful operation, Putin's ratings soared. The Russian people praised the Kremlin's actions, while the West did not give any harsh response. Putin was clearly satisfied with his work. Now let's move to 2021, when rumors began to swirl about Russia's impending attack on Ukraine. By that time, Putin's approval rating had already dropped quite a bit. Putin had to come up with something new, something that would make him great again in the eyes of Russians, like he was after the annexation of Crimea. Apparently, Putin had no better idea than to take over all of Ukraine. February 24, 2022. Every Ukrainian knows this date very well, because it is the very day when the Kremlin madman decided to realize his next sick fantasy, unleashing a full-scale war on the territory of a neighboring country, except that in Moscow clearly hoped to do everything quickly, not just so Russian propagandists said that Kiev will be captured in 3 days. Unfortunately, for Putin, everything went, to put it mildly, not according to plan. For more than 2.5 years Russia has been fighting with Ukraine, and it is no longer about capturing the entire territory of the country, but only 20%, which is also not a small amount. The war is still in an active phase, and how it will eventually end is unknown. At the moment, only one thing is clear. Russia does not want to return the occupied territories to Ukraine. As I said at the beginning of the video, Trump plans to end the war in Ukraine as soon as possible by bringing Zelensky and Putin to the negotiating table. It would seem, what's wrong with that? The fact is that a normal agreement represents concessions on both sides, but what kind of normal agreement are we talking about, if one of the parties does not want to make any concessions? Putin demands from Ukraine the fulfillment of various points that are most disadvantageous for it, while he cannot promise it anything in return. Understandably, Kiev does not want to agree to such a delusional agreement. But then what is Trump going to do? It is quite possible that he will force Zelensky to agree to the Kremlin's terms. I suggest considering the consequences of such an end to the war. So, the conflict is over, the soldiers have returned to their families, and the bloodshed is over. Putin got not all of Ukraine, but not a small part of it. What will be going through his mind at that moment? About the same as in 2014, when he violated all agreements with impunity and brazenly invaded the territory of a neighboring country, taking away part of the land from that country. That case created in him the belief that he could easily violate agreements and invade other people's territories. If Putin had gotten a decent response from the West in 2014, he probably would not have decided to launch a full-scale war with Ukraine in 2022, because he would have known that he could not get away with it. If Kiev does agree to Putin's ultimatum, his delusional belief that he can do whatever he wants and still get away with it will become even more entrenched in his mind. Then, what would prevent him from attacking, for example, the Baltic? Overall, nothing. Putin has seen how the West has responded sluggishly to his actions in Ukraine, so he probably won't even be spooked by the fact that the Baltic states are part of the North Atlantic Alliance. Putin, based on his past experience, thinks that if the same protracted war starts there, sooner or later the West will still agree to give him some of the conquered territories. That is, the better Russia is prepared, the more territories it will be able to take back. The West will forgive everything in any case, and will decide to leave everything as it is. This whole situation is reminiscent of what happened before World War II, when the well-known Austrian artist also violated agreements, invaded foreign territories, and every time he was forgiven, because no one wanted another big war. In the end, Hitler's impunity led to the outbreak of World War II. At the moment, we are following the same scenario. European politicians are still trying to play a game with the dictator, in which the dictator is constantly changing and breaking the rules. How can they win in such a game? They can't, it is simply impossible. Current European officials do not learn from the mistakes of their ancestors. History is repeating itself, only now instead of Germany there is Russia, and instead of Hitler there is Putin. The current Russian government uses German Nazi terms quite often, and on February 6th of this year, Putin said that Hitler was forced to attack Poland. Putin, like Hitler, justified the outbreak of full-scale war by defending his people from alleged discrimination. In fact, I can draw many more parallels between World War II Germany and today's Russia, which I'm going to do in one of my next videos. If you're watching this when it's already out, you should see a tooltip at the top. Be sure to click on it. There is clearly no sensible agreement with Putin, at least not anytime soon. The best thing the West can do in this situation is to look back and work on the mistakes of their forefathers and continue to support Ukraine no matter what. If Russia loses the Ukrainian territories it occupies, it will be a clear signal to Putin that he will no longer be able to do whatever he wants with impunity. In any case, only one thing is clear now: the times of peace are over. At the moment we are on the threshold of either World War III or hybrid war, in other words, the Second Cold War. Russia will not rest either in case of victory or defeat. Europe must be prepared for any kind of attack from the Russian side, and there will clearly be attacks. Yes, what to talk about? The Kremlin is already actively attacking Europe with all kinds of sabotage and provocations. For example, Moscow recently interfered in the elections in Moldova with the help of the unrecognized Republic of Transnistria. About this country, where time has stopped, I also already have a video on my channel. You can watch it right now.